I need to tell you exactly what happened on Route 9 in rural Georgia on the night of October 14th because I have told 3 different versions of this story to 3 different people and none of them believed me, and I am done softening it to make it easier to accept. This is what happened, and I am going to tell it exactly as it happened without leaving anything out, because the parts one used to leave out are the parts that matter most. My girlfriend Dana and I were driving back from a wedding in Savannah. It was a Saturday night, close to midnight, and we were both tired in that particular pleasant way you get tired after a wedding, full of good food and a few glasses of wine and the particular warmth of watching 2 people you like very much commit to each other in front of everyone they know. We were happy. I want to say that clearly because what happened later has a way of coloring everything around it, and I want you to understand that we were in a good mood, we were relaxed, we were not on edge or anxious or primed to be frightened by anything. Dana had fallen asleep in the passenger seat somewhere around the edge of Savannah, and I was driving with the music low and enjoying the quiet and thinking about nothing in particular when I realized I needed gas and checked the navigation and saw we were about 30 miles from the nearest station. We had taken Route 9 instead of the highway because Dana had read that there was construction on I-16 and she wanted to avoid the backup. Route 9 goes through about 40 miles of nothing, real Georgia backroads, nothing, no streetlights, no gas stations for long stretches, no houses you can see from the road, just pine trees on both sides going back into the dark and the occasional dirt road turning off into nothing and the solid white line on the shoulder catching my headlights. I had been on it for maybe 20 minutes when the tire blew. Not a slow leak, not the kind where you feel the handling get sluggish and realize something is wrong. A full blowout, the kind that happens all at once, a sound like a gunshot directly underneath the car and the steering wheel trying to rip itself out of my hands and the car pulling hard to the left toward the trees. I got it under control, which took longer than I would like to admit, and pulled onto the shoulder and put it in park and sat there for a second with my hands still on the wheel and my heart somewhere in my throat. Dana had woken up when it happened and she was looking at me and asking what had happened, and I told her we had a blowout and I needed to check the damage. She stayed in the car. I got out. The air outside was warm and thick the way Georgia air is in October, not cold, just heavy, and the insects in the pine trees on both sides of the road were making a sound that filled everything, that particular wall of sound that southern nights make in the summer and early fall that you either find comforting or deeply unsettling depending on the situation. That night I found it unsettling. The road was completely empty. Not a single car had passed us in either direction in the 20 minutes we had been on Route 9, and none passed while I was standing on the shoulder looking at the rear left tire, which was not merely flat but genuinely destroyed. The tread had come apart in a way I had never seen a tire come apart, shredded in strips that were curling away from the rim, and there were marks on the asphalt near where the blowout had happened that I looked at for a moment and then stopped looking at because they didn't make sense and I needed to focus on the practical problem. I got the spare out of the trunk and the jack and the lug wrench, and I set up on the shoulder and started the process, which if you have never changed a tire on a dark highway shoulder at midnight is one of those experiences that makes you understand very quickly how much the presence of other people and streetlights contributes to your sense of personal safety. I had the flat off and was crouching to position the spare against the hub when I heard the footsteps. I want to be very specific about what I heard because this is the part people push back on most. I heard footsteps on asphalt. Not in the trees. Not on a dirt shoulder. On the road itself, on the asphalt, coming from the direction we had come from. Not running. Walking. A slow, deliberate, unhurried pace that had a quality to it I can only describe as purposeful, the way something walks when it knows exactly where it is going and has no reason to hurry because it knows you are not going anywhere. I stood up and turned and looked down the road behind us. The hazard lights were throwing their orange pulses across the asphalt, 1000 to 1000, and in between the pulses the road was completely dark. I could not see more than about 20 yards back clearly. But I could hear the footsteps. They were maybe 50 yards away and they were getting closer. I stood very still with the lug wrench in my hand and I watched the road and I waited for a person to come into view, for the shape of a human being to resolve out of the darkness the way shapes do when they are close enough. No shape came. The footsteps kept coming. I could hear them clearly, feet on asphalt, steady, unhurried, and I am telling you there was nothing there. I was looking directly at the source of the sound and there was nothing visible at 50 yards, at 40 yards, at 30. At 30 yards I backed up against the car without deciding to. Just moved. My body made that decision independently and I did not argue with it. Dana knocked on the passenger window and I held up a hand without looking at her because I did not want to take my eyes off the road. 20 yards. I could hear the footsteps that clearly now. I could hear the particular sound of the sole of a foot on asphalt, that slight scuff on the down step that you hear when someone is walking at a deliberate pace. I could hear it and I could not see anything producing it. 15 yards. I was holding the lug wrench in both hands now without having made a conscious decision to do that either. 10 yards. Dana opened the car door. She said my name. And the footsteps stopped. Not slowed. Not changed direction. Stopped. Complete and immediate silence, the insects in the trees, my own breathing, nothing else. I stood there looking at the empty road for what was probably 10 seconds and felt like much longer. There was nothing there. The road was empty. The hazard lights kept pulsing over nothing. Dana asked me from the doorway what was wrong and I told her to get back in the car and lock the doors and she did and I heard the locks click and I stood there for another few seconds looking at the empty road before I got back in too. I sat in the passenger seat and told her exactly what I had heard. She listened without saying anything and then she said she had heard footsteps too. She had been awake for the last minute or so and she had heard them through the closed window and she had assumed it was someone coming to help until she looked through the windshield and saw that the road was empty. We sat in that car on the shoulder of Route 9 for about 2 minutes and neither of us spoke and neither of us looked away from the road behind us. Then I told her I had to finish changing the tire because we could not stay there all night. She told me to be careful in a voice that did not sound like her usual voice. I got back out. I worked faster than I have ever worked in my life. Kept the flashlight in my left hand pointed at the road behind us while I positioned the spare and ran the lug nuts on with my right and I did not let my attention leave that stretch of empty road for more than a second at a time. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound except the insects and my own breathing and the sounds of the work I was doing. I got back in the car and started the engine and we pulled back onto Route 9 but that there was something she needed to tell me. She said that while I was outside the second time, finishing the tire, she had been watching the road behind us in the passenger side mirror. She said she had been watching it continuously and that for most of the time she watched it she had seen nothing, just the empty road and the hazard lights pulsing. But at a certain point, she said, she had looked away for a moment to check something on the dashboard, and when she looked back at the mirror there was a figure standing at the edge of where the hazard lights reached. Not walking. Standing still. Watching the car. She said it was there for several seconds and then I got back into the car and we drove away and she did not look at the mirror again after that. I asked her to describe what she saw. She said it was tall. She said it was standing completely still in a way that did not look quite right, that stillness that things have when they are not people, when they do not shift their weight or adjust their posture the way living bodies do automatically. She said she could not make out any detail because it was at the edge of the light and the light was orange and intermittent. She said she was not sure it had a face. We drove back to Atlanta that night without stopping again. We have talked about Route 9 exactly twice since it happened, both times briefly and without resolution. There is a version of that night that I can almost construct from reasonable explanations. The footsteps could have been an animal on the road, though I cannot name an animal that walks on asphalt with that cadence, that weight, that deliberate unhurried pace. Dana could have seen a trick of the hazard lights in the mirror, a pattern of light and shadow that her tired mind assembled into a shape. The whole thing could have been the product of two tired people on a dark road late at night with their nerves already activated by a sudden blowout. I can almost construct that version. I come close to it sometimes, especially during the day, especially in well-lit places surrounded by other people. But then I come back to the footsteps stopping the exact moment Dana said my name. Not before. Not after. The exact moment. Like something in the dark had heard it and decided to wait. And I cannot find the reasonable explanation for that part. I have looked for it for 2 years and I cannot find it. I do not drive Route 9 anymore. There are other ways to get from Atlanta to Savannah. They all take longer and I take them every time without exception and I do not think about why, or I try not to, because thinking about why requires me to think about what was walking toward me on an empty road at midnight and stopped when my name was spoken, and I find that I have a limit on how often I am willing to do that. We all have things we think about only so much and then we stop. Route 9 is mine.